So what this is the capitalist club. It's the very richest in the world, the most powerful at the top of our corporations. And now, it used to be a time that they would go to politicians. Now the politicians are all going there, right? They rule the roost.
Welcome back to The Tea. I'm your host, Myriam François. Before we dive in, I want to say a huge thank you for coming on this journey with us. Our goal with The Tea is to share knowledge that can translate to people power. And your support is quite literally what makes this show possible. So if you love what we do, hit subscribe now. And if you want ad-free episodes, exclusive content, and to help shape future shows, you can also join our Patreon, your very own resistance community. The link's in our bio. The myth of meritocracy is possibly the most successful gaslight in modern history. We're told hard work is a golden ticket, and yet the richest 1% now hold more wealth than the bottom 90% of humanity combined. As the 2026 Davos summit focuses on social preparedness, aka prepping us for global disruptions, Oxfam warns that billionaires possess more political power than ever before. But make no mistake, this isn't just about inequality, it's about power. Who shapes politics, the economy, and the media, and who gets left behind. In Britain, this fairy tale is propped up by a strategy of horizontal infighting. We're told the white working class and minorities are enemies, a narrative that protects a tiny elite while everyone else fights over the crumbs of a broken social contract. Last year, UK billionaire wealth rose by £35 million each day, and the richest 1% of Britons now hold more wealth than 70% of all Brits. Meanwhile, 22% of the UK population now lives in poverty. This isn't racial self-interest. It's a top-down diversion, ensuring we fight each other while the political class protects executive pay gaps that have reached 386 to 1. My guest today has spent 20 years proving that while awareness of inequality grows, policy moves in the opposite direction. She argues that change never comes from the top, but from collective power refusing to know its place. She's an economist, an activist, and a survivor of the brutalist theatre of British politics. From the halls of Oxford to the front lines of her home seat in Chingford, she's challenged the social mobility lie at every turn. Now the executive director of Tax Justice UK and author of Know Your Place, she's here to talk about why taxing the ultra-rich is a democratic necessity. Joining me to spill the tea on power, class, and the political revolution we're told not to want is Dr. Faiza Shaheen. Faiza, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Oh, wow. That was like such a great intro. Thank you. Wow.
Thank you so much for being here. So, look, many people will know your face. They'll have seen you on political debate programs. But tell us a little bit about where Faiza started out in life and how that has shaped kind of the work that you do today that's so focused on issues of inequality.
Yeah, I always say that I've sort of lived in equality. So I grew up in a working class family. My dad was a car mechanic. And we always grew up knowing about more racial injustice. My dad was really, really loved people like Malcolm X and Muhammad Ali, and he would talk about them. And, he left school at 14, but he knew a lot about the world. And that was dinner time conversation for us. And my mum was very fixated on how well we would do at school. So that combination of that politics and like, you are going to have to do well at school, and kind of came together with me going from that working class family in local state schools to Oxford and just seeing the class system in action. And after that, just becoming more and more obsessed with issues of inequality. At a time when I started doing my PhD before the financial crisis, like people didn't really, but it turned out to be the issue of our time.
What did Oxford teach you beyond the degree?
Well, the degree taught me the opposite of everything I need to know, by the way. Philosophy, politics, and economics. I was like, wait, this all seems wrong. But I mean, really, it was the privilege of those that are the richest in society that go to the top schools, not just your average private school, but to the Etons and the Westminsters of the world. And their snobbery, really, like when you see them get drunk and the things that they say, or the way they would treat some of my friends from East London, it really made me angry, and it really gave me energy to say, wait, these people are going to run the world, and I need to make sure I'm in a position to use this incredible privilege I've had to fight back because I know what they really think. I know what they really think about us, and it's not a lot.
Now, you should have been a poster girl for the Labour Party, right? So working class background, you go to Oxford, you study economics, you're focused on inequality. You know, I would have thought that a Labour Party by any other name would have been absolutely thrilled to have somebody like you in its ranks. And yet, obviously, for those who are not aware, you were effectively very unceremoniously kicked out in 2024. So what went wrong?
Well, the Labour Party's been captured. So I joined under Corbyn and was really welcomed into the party at that time. But of course, was one of the survivors that they hadn't managed to get rid of. And I was being very vocal internally and to some extent externally about my support for Palestine. And I crossed the line for them. It wasn't just my views on Gaza, but it was also that I was talking about corporate greed. So one of the things I got told off about was that I'd done a video for striking teachers explaining inflation and saying, this inflation isn't coming about because of your wages, which is one of the things that they're trying to tell you. It's coming about because of energy prices, and that's driven by corporate greed. Yes, Russia invading Ukraine, but much more than that. And that was, by the way, something I was teaching at London School of Economics. It's what the IMF was saying. In the US, Biden was still president. He was talking about greedflation. But I was told that was crossing a line. I was being anti-business. So, people need to realise, they can see it, that the Labour Party isn't, it doesn't represent working class people anymore. It doesn't represent the working class values or the needs that working class people have in this country. And so I definitely stood apart from the other candidates coming in, and I really stood out as a sore thumb in various meetings, although I avoided most of them. And so, as soon as they realised the election was upon us, they just used any excuse to get rid of me. But in a way, it's not a surprise. Like, it's not really about me. It's about a system that doesn't want these sorts of voices. They want voices that can be controlled, that are going to do what they're told. And who are they told to do things by, right? By corporations, by lobbying power at the very top.
Even within the so-called left of the UK political spectrum. Well, the official reason that was given for why you were excluded from the party was, of course, because you had allegedly liked a number of tweets dating back to 2014. One of them referenced a Jon Stewart Daily Show, so very radical sketch, clearly, about freedom of expression in the context of Israel and Palestine. And I'm just going to read it out because I want people to kind of be aware of what this, profound sin that you'd committed that required you to be excluded. So this is what it read, and it's still up, by the way, on the Daily Show X feed. So clearly no one there thought it was such an issue. And it read, every time you say something even mildly critical of Israel, you're immediately assailed by scores of hysterical people who explain to you why you're completely wrong, how you're biased against Israel. Moreover, you can't easily ignore them because they're not just random people. They tend to be friends or people who move in the same circles as you. Those people are mobilized by professional organizations. Now, you later apologized on Newsnight for liking that tweet. Why did you apologize?
Yeah, I think about that sometimes. And I think ultimately there was actually nothing wrong in what was being said. I genuinely liked that at 3:30 in the morning. I had a newborn baby and I was up at all times. And I didn't mean to like it because I knew it's the sort of thing that people go hysterical about. But I think in that context where, you're sort of made to feel, especially, as a Muslim, any excuse to call you an anti-Semite. And I do think with everything that's happened and the way people have seen things play out for even people like Gary Lineker, then I think it's just shown those accusations for what they really are. And of course, there is real anti-Semitism and it's a real worry in society. But when you start pinning it on people that are not doing that, but are being critical of Israel and critical about the fact that it's so hard to speak out about these issues. And by the way, that was a video by Jon Stewart as a Jewish person talking about how hard it is as a Jewish person. The idea that you can't say things like that, I think, is become unaccepted by most people. And even at that moment, people were so upset about what happened to me. And I was surprised by how, there was a rally organized locally by some local mums and hundreds of people turned up. And then we decided to run as independent. And in 4 weeks, we got 12,500 votes. So it just really demonstrated. And people would say to me all the time, it's ridiculous. this is ridiculous.
So clearly, the motivation for getting rid of you wasn't because, there'd been widespread complaints from the voter base around what you'd said. We often hear this idea of a climate of fear in politics. And you talked about being a Muslim and the kind of the concerns around being accused of anti-Semitism, because for Muslims it's particularly acute because, let's be honest,
they assume
there's an Islamophobic assumption implicit within this discourse, which is that somehow by virtue of being a Muslim that we should somehow be more proximate to anti-Semitism. It's actually a horrific assumption, given that Islam literally exists in the legacy of Judaism, but let's just put that by the side, shall we? Let me just ask you, where is the climate of fear coming from? Because let me be naive for a second here and say to you, my idea of politics is that my politician is fearful of me, the citizen, right?
Yeah,
I'm thinking you
be.
need to shake in your boots because of what I might say. But my sense is maybe that's not what they're scared of.
No, absolutely not. And I think obviously this started a lot earlier with Jeremy Corbyn and, just efforts to get rid of the left by using anti-Semitism, which is so messed up, on so many levels. And, it really came from people that are on the right of the party that hate the left and ideas of taxing the rich more or public ownership of water, and don't want those voices represented. It was a tool. And it's really, really unfortunate that they have used that, because it's undermined the whole seriousness of anti-Semitism. And they've used it all over the place. Like I say, very prominent figures are accused constantly, whether it's just liking a tweet by mistake or, just being friends with someone in a picture with someone. And it is organised in the sense that, people were watching my Twitter constantly to find anything that they could get me out on. And so liking that tweet, which is nothing compared to the work I'd done. And as a consequence, Labour, didn't win that seat and probably won't win it anytime soon. And that would have been a big one, by the way. We were running against Ian Duncan Smith. I mean, I'm told by people very close to the tops of this government to say that they decided that they'd rather have Ian Duncan Smith than me, because they don't want agitators.
And for people who are not familiar with UK politics, what does that mean?
Well, Ian Duncan Smith is a conservative. He's a grandee conservative. He used to be the leader of the Conservative Party. He led on the welfare cuts in this country. He's done a lot of damaging things. And so the idea that they would prefer him over someone that is critical of the economic system and supports Palestinians, that just goes to show you where they are ideologically and where, their lobby base and their funding base in terms of people that are helping them to have money in the absence of having a big membership, right? They have to rely on big donors. That's also where their politics is. And it's the establishment view, right? It's the status quo. It's protecting wealth, continuing with the same foreign policies. It's the no change perspective. And so that is where it's coming from. But, they only allow people climb up the ladder of the Labour Party, or this version of the Labour Party only allows people to be there that take those positions.
Corporate capture.
100%, yeah.
Let me ask you about this, because obviously, so you end up being dismissed on the basis of, a tweet, which I think we can all fairly agree is not anti-Semitic. But there is a video going viral at the moment of the Tate brothers, Nick Fuentes, Nico, and other far-right influencers in a Miami club. I'm sure you've seen it doing the rounds, appearing to blast Kanye West's Hitler in the club. Really offensive. I mean, I watched it thinking to myself, if I was Jewish and I was in that club, I would be petrified, absolutely petrified. Can you imagine the levels of anti-Semitism that are being normalized by people on the right, that you can play a song like that in the club and people just are dancing and singing along with it? No one else thought to just be like, I'm sorry, what? I mention this because we're seeing this sort of pattern where people like yourself will speak out about the genocide and then are quickly accused of anti-Semitism on the basis of, I'm going to use the word nonsense, because in this occurrence, I think that's a fair description of what you went through. But somehow Nick Fuentes et al. Can openly chant something as vile as that in a club, and it barely even makes a headline. How do you make sense of that?
Well, it's different rules, isn't it, for different people? depending on your proximity to power and your willingness to push certain agendas. So you can be an anti-Semite, but if you still support Israel or, hate the Palestinians more, hate Muslims more, then you're okay. So, this is the thing. Rules are not applied on the equal basis. And everyone can see that. This is why it's falling apart, right? This is why so many people have woken up to the realities of what the Palestinians face, but also the way in which our politics is working, is that they're seeing these, so on the one hand, Ukrainians come, on the other hand, the Palestinians can die. Like, how is this okay? What's the difference here? And I think this is the real challenge, I think, with anti-Semitism now going forward, is that, like, the people that, when we should take it seriously, but maybe people won't take it seriously because of the way in which it's been used and weaponized. And it's really making Jewish people unsafe, I think.
You said in another interview that you hope one day to speak more openly about some of the issues of Islamophobia that you were witness to in the Labour Party. Is that day today?
To be honest, I think I have buried a lot of the nastiness because I just had to move on with my life. And but sometimes my old boss, when I was at LSE, I'd constantly be calling me like, "Oh my God, I just got off this horrible call. Guess what happened?" And he reminds me of like how horrible it was. The Islamophobia was rampant. I remember when it came to Gaza, and even on being on this group of all the other candidates who I see in Parliament now, by the way, just the discussions around the Palestinians and people in Gaza being killed versus the hostages was just so remarkable. And I remember Starmer had gone into this mosque as a way to try and negate that awful statement he made that said that Israel was allowed to turn off electricity and water. He had done this as a PR exercise, and the mosque had written this statement saying, like, we've been used, and this is the photos are showing this in a completely different way. And they put out this statement, and I put it on the candidates group, and I said, like, this is outrageous, like, that the mosque has to come out and say this. People were like, actually, no, this just makes the mosque look bad. This makes the Muslim community look bad. It was just any excuse to blame Muslims or to put Muslims at the bottom of the pile. It just would come up all the time. Like when I would complain about Islamophobia, I was told that I wasn't allowed to talk about that publicly. And I was like, so I'm not allowed to talk about my experience of Islamophobia publicly, even after everything that's happened in the party. And they were like, no, you can only come to us with it. Like the London region office, basically. And so there was huge double standards. And, there's been really good reports on it. Martin Ford, KC wrote this amazing report about the hierarchy of racism in the Labour Party, but obviously it's not taken seriously. But I mean, I do want people to know out there that there is the sense that you can treat certain minorities any which way you want, right? So I'm in a meeting and I'm saying this policy, this position on Gaza is absolutely wrong morally, but also you're going to lose votes over this. And they said, people forget. People will forget, Faiza. Muslim community will forget. They did with the Iraq War. And I want people to know that our votes are taken for granted. And, they assume by scaring us at reform and etc. that we'll go back to them. But I do think that people need to know that there is a sense of complacency. And it's because they think we're stupid.
I was going to say, what is driving this Islamophobia? Because sometimes we use the word Islamophobia, but it masks what we're really talking about. Like, what exactly were you observing? Because Islamophobia can be anything from like, I just don't really like the religion of Islam. Cool, I don't mind. You're allowed to not like my faith. I also may not like your face. Like, it happens. But like, we also may see something a bit more insidious. So what do you mean by Islamophobia within the Labour Party? What exactly are we talking about?
Well, it's a hierarchy of human worth. That's what I was seeing. That some people are allowed to be bullied. Some people, it's okay. It's not a big deal if they get racism or, aren't given support when they face an Islamophobic Tory councillor, for instance, in my case. And it's because, like, I roll, Islamophobia, don't really take it seriously.
But why? The numbers are there. The stats are there. You've got a base telling you it's real. How does it get ignored?
I think people are just prejudiced. I mean, I know it's a why, because why would you be prejudiced? But they are. Like, they just think that Muslims are lesser. Like, that's what some of these people think. That is what they think. And that's why they think Muslim community will forget and will continue to vote Labour, because they think we're stupid. That's what they think.
Wow. I mean, I think I was hoping for a sophisticated, but something as basic as they basically just think we're dumb.
Yeah, and we're not seen as like a power broker for them. Like, yeah, you know, maybe a little bit more after some of the independents won. They're a little bit more scared of the bloc Muslim vote. But they think ultimately by the time it's the next election, like Gaza will be, you know, as if the Palestinians will suddenly have their freedom and we would have forgotten everything that they've gone through and continue to go through. And the fact that Trump has just taken Gaza and looks like build some new Gaza. I mean, as if we're just going to forget that.
Well, I mean, there is the border peace.
Yeah, that will solve everything.
As Elon Musk pointed out, is it peace, P-I-E-C-E, or P-A-E-C-E? Lord only knows at this stage. Speaking of Davos, there were panels at Davos this year that claimed to be tackling inequality, and I was really keen to kind of get your insights on it. So one of the things we're hearing is a push towards this notion of stakeholder purpose, the idea that billion-dollar corporations will voluntarily fix inequality through better internal governance. Should stakeholder purpose be taking up a whole panel at Davos?
I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. So what this is the capitalist club. It's the very richest in the world, the most powerful at the top of our corporations. And now, you know, it used to be a time that they would go to politicians. Now the politicians are all going there, right? They rule the roost. These big corporations and rich individuals at the top of them, they are coming together. They're looking at the problems in the world. They're deciding what are the most important problems. And then they're offering the solutions, as if these people are going to take the issue of inequality seriously, because actually it would mean they would be taxed a lot more and we would redistribute their wealth in quite a structural and fundamental way. So the idea that some internal governance, I mean, they don't even believe in trade unions. Most of these people don't allow their workforce to unionize. So that would be one thing that would counter these sorts of bosses that are making sure that the wages at the top are increasing massively. I mean, it's laughable. I mean, I don't take much note of anything that comes out of there because it's just not serious. It's not to be taken seriously. What I would say is that it's really worrying that over the years that Oxfam has been putting out really important numbers every year, you know, how much richer the 1% have got. I remember in the beginning, it was sort of like 80 individuals have as much wealth as the bottom half. And this year, the big headline was that the increase in billionaire wealth was the highest last year and triple the last 5 years. So that, you know, they're getting richer and richer and richer and richer, and how that's accumulating and influencing politics. But I think for me, one thing we have to stop and think about as people that have been working on inequality for such a long time is that people are much more aware of the issue, but Davos is growing and their influence seems to be growing. Like, how are we in this place?
Well, my big one is like we're all living through the impoverishment, right? Almost regardless of class, unless you're part of the 1% today in this country. And actually, I think across many countries, you're living through the impoverishment whilst observing the bloating before our eyes of this select few. And yet we are constantly told that the two are not connected. So they're getting significantly richer and we're getting significantly poorer, but they've got nothing to do with each other. So do they not, Faiza?
I mean, sometimes they do the opposite, right? They say they need to get richer for us to get richer. We need the rich. Oh, don't tax the rich or leave. We need them. They invest. There's still like this trickle down ideology that permeates our economic policy, which is insane to me, because everything has shown us, and the economic research has shown us, that it doesn't trickle down. It's just actually funneled upwards. And it leaves us with all kinds of problems in the economy, because when you don't have the middle class and the working class able to grow the economy, then you're going to just get more and more inequality. It's so infuriating. And I think, and again, like, this is where some of the teaching that I do at London School of Economics is really about this, the difference between where the politicians are and where we are. Because I think most people recognize, like, wait, I'm working harder and harder. I mean, how much harder do you want me to work? Like, I can only work so hard and I can't make this work. And you think a generation back, my dad was working class. My mum didn't work until we were maybe 12, 13. One person was able to work and have a family and own a house in London in one generation, everyone has to work. And even then, you can't make it work. Even people on like really good incomes of like 100K are like, wait,
Yeah.
this is unaffordable for me. So what is it like for normal people, everyone else on 30K? I mean,
Yeah. And I think the big question is how did we get here, Faiza? Like, what are the economic mechanisms that have led us to such profound inequality?
I think the thing is it's economic and it's political and it's how those things interlock. You know, the worst thing about inequality is that it's self-perpetuating. It leads to this vicious cycle. So when I started working on it, yes, there was wealth concentration. Yes, we were worried about it. But it was before the financial crisis, and the focus was much more about income and how we could increase minimum wages, and people were more focused on poverty and not really looking at what was happening at the top. And then what happened, you know, with the financial crisis and the fact that we bailed out the banks and then had austerity, so normal people paid for it whilst bankers went back to getting their bonuses, was that the financial system allowed inequality to continue, wealth concentration. So basically what's happened, it makes much more sense for, if you're rich, to put your money into capital that already exists. You get a higher return on buying huge amounts of property in London than you would creating a new good and hiring people. And it's just resulted in this balancing of the economy or unbalancing of the economy away from normal people to the rich. And once you accumulate some wealth, then you get a dividends on that every year. And you just get richer and richer. And so it's, you know, the kind of normal economy is just not functioning the way it should. And this is where the politics comes in, right? So anything should have been self-correcting. So people should have been like, wait a minute, what's going on? I'm not going to vote for this anymore. But because then the very richest use their money in our political system, then policies are shaped and the politicians we're allowed to have are shaped by them as well. And the conversation, right? So we know that lots of rich individuals are giving to Nigel Farage. I mean, that's always happens in history, that the very richest, when they feel that the pitchforks are coming for them, they'll start giving money to the right and the far right. So that's what's happened. That you've had an economy that stopped working for normal people and working very well for people with wealth. And then they're able to fix the political system in their favour. And that's why we feel stuck. But at the same time, I'm really hopeful because I do think that people have woken up. Partly because of Palestine, but partly because, it just doesn't... How are so many of us broke? How can it be that it's so hard to save?
But so you're hopeful, and I really want to return to that because I'm not sure that I feel very hopeful. But I want to ask you about this idea that is, if you Google the idea of inequality right now, the most common debate that we find is over this idea of like taxing the rich, and it's presented as a debate, right? It's presented that actually you don't know what you're talking about, you naive little girl, asking us to tax the rich because they'll all just leave, Faiza. They will just leave with all of their stuff and we will be poorer.
Yeah, that's a common thing. I think we hear this a lot at Tax Justice UK. A very small wealth tax of 2% over £10 million that would raise about 26 billion a year is the thing that we kind of go out and advocate. And you're right that one of the things that, but we need the rich will leave. And then we also do work with these patriotic millionaires that say, no, we're happy to be taxed more. So there are some rich people that are saying we can afford to be taxed more. So I think we need to kind of amplify that voice more and more. There are people leaving and some of those are very rich. Some of those are because they're not very patriotic. For the most part, people are staying. The people that are leaving are young people that no longer see a future in this country because of inequality, because of the fact that they've come out with like insane student loans and debt, and the fact that they can't see themselves ever buying a house or being able to have kids and a family in this country. Those are the things that we need to fix. We are losing young people. We should be much more worried about that. And we're losing doctors because our NHS is such a mess. I have a nephew that has come from Pakistan and he's working in a hospital here and he's been shocked. Like working in a public hospital in Pakistan, he's come here and he's like shocked by the state of our NHS. That's what we should be worried about. And a lot of the hype around the very rich leaving, we know to be false. One of the main things that they based that on was this report written by basically a one-man consultancy for this company that sells golden passports and supports people in getting golden passports, which is basically you pay a lot of money and you can come and live here. And they've got a vested interest in saying, the rich are leaving and you shouldn't tax the rich more. But when they looked in, and so that report showed thousands of rich people are leaving, and when the numbers were looked into, guess what? Made up. This guy had basically looked at people's LinkedIn and Facebook and extrapolated up the numbers, and it's just absolute rubbish. But the FT had already written like 100 stories based on that one study, and then they did one retraction. So, really question where this is coming from when you hear it.
Let me ask you about taxation. There's so much content online in particular that's anti-taxation, right? It's like, move to Dubai so you don't have to be taxed. And like, oh my God, I'm being taxed so much money. And look, I understand why people are angry with taxation, because this level of services that we get in this country is so poor now for the amount people are being taxed. And I would say particularly for working people, obviously, as opposed to people who are living off other people's blood, sweat and tears. How do you reverse this perception that tax is inherently problematic? So my cousin's Swedish, half Swedish, and she grew up her entire life with this idea of the connection between taxation and the public services that they benefit from, right? Which are really, really good in Sweden when it comes to childcare, when it comes to the hospitals, when it comes to education, free higher education. And so when I talk about tax with her, she's always just like, I don't understand what your problem is. Like, to us, it's very obvious that you see that road that is really smooth, taxes. You see the hospital your grandma's being cared at, your taxes. Like, why have we got to the point in this country where nobody wants to pay taxes? And therefore, it's very easy to sell people a right-wing agenda of we need less taxes.
Yeah, I mean, that comparison with Sweden, and I used to work with the Swedish government, so I used to hear some of that. Like, it just goes to show that it's cultural, it's not factual. Actually, if you tell a different story about what people are getting for their taxes, and if they can see that return, then they are much more willing to pay it and see the value of it. The thing I would say is that despite this major attempt to get people to not like the idea of taxing the rich more or be scared of it, still poll after poll, so 75% of the public supports a wealth tax. And so it's still the vast majority are able to see through that, even with all the propaganda. But there's a few genuine reasons as to why people are turned off. I mean, one is that, like we say, people are finding it difficult. But it's only they're finding it difficult and then looking at the very richest and thinking, wait a minute, how comes you're not being taxed more? So there's a new study out that shows that people get particularly upset about how much they're being taxed when they find out that the richest 1% are actually taxed at a lower rate once you take all types of taxes into account than they are. And they are not only more likely to want the rich to be taxed more, but they also think that other people should be taxed less. So that kind of inherent unfairness that people are recognizing in the system, partly because awareness has grown of inequality, is sort of inadvertently also making people less willing to pay their taxes too, because they're like, wait, this is just unfair. And so it's kind of completely rational, because you're like, why should I pay when they're not paying? So we need a kind of fundamental overhaul, both in the progressivity of our tax system, so that people are like, no, okay, yeah, I'm paying my part, but they're paying a bigger part because they've got more money, and more of a positive case about what we do with this money. I mean, it's hard here because obviously we've had austerity and it feels like we pay loads of taxes and nothing works. So, to be able to turn that around and to be able to offer something really coherent. So we're going to do a wealth tax. And I worked with governments around the world during COVID, and they were putting in place something called a solidarity tax at that time. So they were taking, in this case, kind of short-term taxes, whether it be wealth or higher income, and saying, we're going to use this in this moment because people are in trouble. So we're going to redistribute it specifically through these checks that everyone's going to get, or we're going to put it straight into healthcare. So people know where it's going as well. And I think some of that needs to happen. I mean, in the tax world, people really hate the idea of saying you're going to use this tax for X, so it's called hypothecation, and people don't always like it. But I think we're in that state politically where we have to offer that because people just don't trust the system anymore. I mean, overall, they don't trust it, but they don't trust tax system.
Well, clearly not. And so there's 2 points I wanted to put to you. One is obviously the big counter to taxing the rich, which we always hear, which is, well, look at France or Germany or any number of countries that did try and implement a wealth tax. They've all reversed it. It doesn't work. Although I would like to point out, being French, that we still have the highest number of millionaires in the whole of Europe, and we pay far more taxes than people in the UK do. So just a sidebar.
And there's a new conversation in France about a new wealth tax, right?
Absolutely.
It's very live.
We're not allergic in France to a wealth tax. We actually had 100% wealth tax at one point, at a much lower rate, by the way, than the 2% on assets above 10 million. But tell me about why, what do you say to those people who say, if it worked, these countries would have retained it? Why are they reversing it if it works?
I mean, definitely you have to look at the design issues, but I'm talking to people in Norway, for instance, and they're kind of laughing, shocked by the way we're talking about the Norwegian wealth tax here, because I said to them, like, it's used against us here. It's used as an argument as to why we shouldn't have a wealth tax. And they're in their very Norwegian way are like, what? But it works well. Why would we have kept it if it wasn't raising any money? And so, you look at Norway, you look at Spain, it's not raising a huge amount of money, but they don't have as many millionaires and billionaires as us. So it's obviously going to have a lower rate. And we can also learn sort of technically from how they are putting those things in place. And honestly, I just don't see where else we can go, because we can't tax income anymore. It's just too much for people.
People can't. We can't handle it. We can't. We can't.
So we have to look to wealth, because actually that is where the money's accumulating. And it's also where people are at, and you can see it with Zohran Mamdani and his win. At his inauguration ceremony, people were shouting, tax the rich, tax the rich. People have just had enough.
Do we have a problem with the circulation of money? Is it a hoarding issue? And I only ask because obviously Islamic economics, for example, has this principle that you have to pay, zakat, you have to pay a tax, if you like, on the money that you have that isn't for your necessities, right? So that needs to go back into the economy. You can't just sit on it. And then we all have obviously this other principle of no interest, right? Money cannot make money of itself. It has to be put into something productive, which usually means investing in other people or businesses or services so that it's going back and working in the economy. And you're allowed to get rich in Islam. People do it all the time. But you're not allowed to hoard. I know this sounds like a really basic question, but why is inequality a problem? If you're enjoying the show, why not join our Patreon community? The Tea is more than just a YouTube show. It's a space to foster meaningful change together at a time of violent turbulence and dizzying change. Becoming a Patreon means you get exclusive content and the chance to shape the show. So join us now, link in our bio. Many people will say some people worked really hard and they did great, and some people are just a bit lazy.
I mean, that's not the case. I mean, firstly, that mostly the people that do well, it comes from inherited wealth or, a very well-off, at least middle-class family, which gave you certain opportunities. So firstly, that's just a myth. That you get the odd exceptions, but they are the exceptions. And often when you peel below it, one of the reasons I did well is because my family had to rely on the benefit system for a while. So the reason I did well is because people paid their taxes and, we had that welfare state to rely on. So firstly, that's just a myth in any case. And secondly, the reason economically why inequality is so important is because of it's less a circulation problem and more about where the money's going and what that produces in society, and the sorts of jobs and the types of jobs that it produces for everyone else, and how other people can also have enough money to live a decent life. And so part of you struggling, feeling like you're always, running, just about keeping up with the bills, doing multiple jobs. And again, this isn't just a UK or US thing. I've worked around the world. People use the same words essentially to describe how that feels, and the unfairness of looking upwards and seeing these very rich people. It's that a lot of the money is sitting in unproductive assets or ways in which to hoard and then to collect interest and dividends and payment off that every year. So there is that hoard. I mean, money circulation is to some extent because of credit and people getting in debt. It's still there, but in the sense of once you're rich, you put your money into these capital assets, you get more and more richer, and it doesn't really produce anything for the rest of society.
One of the other arguments we obviously hear around taxation is like, it's not going to work because we live in a global economy and these companies are global multinationals. And so their assets and their companies are spread all around the world. And so we can't tax them at a national base. They'll just move. And some companies have done that, right? We saw, was it Google move its HQ to Ireland, for example? Like, so yes, that does happen. So how do you address that argument that says if you increase taxation on big corporations, on the very rich, they will just go somewhere like Monaco? Great weather.
I mean, there's a couple of things you can do. That's true that some of them will. I mean, one is that we need global tax rules that make it harder for companies to do that. But currently with Trump in charge in the US, of course, that's not going to happen, really. But what you can do is shame companies, right? Make it embarrassing for them. So, you know, if you're M&S, quintessential British company, why is your money going through Dublin? Why is there an Irish address on every package? I was just talking to one of our supporters at Tax Justice UK about this week. And, you know, we should shame them. I thought you're proud to be British. You've got the Union Jack on your carrier bag. Meanwhile, you're doing these sorts of tricks to avoid paying taxes in this country. And we should absolutely, you know, look to the many companies and individuals that are playing these kind of tricks with our tax system. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, in the perfect world, we would have rules that give us minimum standards. And this was a push by people working on tax justice, but it's just been undermined because of Trump, essentially.
So it's being discussed at Davos, but I guess that because the US isn't a signatory, that it's unlikely to take up, presumably.
Well, we might get some companies that do comply and something's better than nothing. But basically the US multinationals, which is, you know, the vast majority of the richest ones, have been given a carve out. So
who gave them a carve out?
We did.
Why did we do that?
Some other European countries.
Why did we do that?
Appeasement of Trump, right? So you can get good deals somewhere else.
I also think that this is happening for me with individuals. So I don't understand how this country is apparently in the grips of sort of renewed patriotism. That's apparently what the flags are about. And yet, when we see, you know, I don't know, Rio Ferdinand or Lewis Hamilton moving their wealth offshore, as they have done, and sort of boasted about, you know, I'm off to Dubai, so I don't have to pay tax.
So disappointing with Rio Ferdinand.
We celebrate them. We're like, yeah, go you, Rio. You do you. I'm sorry, what? Where is the patriotism? Didn't this country make you the person that went on to get the success that you have? Like, how do you explain a country that claims to be in the grips of patriotism, and yet the people who are our sort of celebrated icons move abroad so they don't have to pay back into the system, and there's no shaming of them?
I think there is a bit of shaming of them, if I can contradict you. I mean, not enough.
Please do. I feel like on social media, everyone's just like, yeah, Rio, enjoy Dubai.
Maybe it's my algorithm, but I also think it probably is, isn't it?
Clearly,
but I have seen
giving something away.
Some of the responses as well I've seen some of the clips and stuff, like people underneath going, that's outrageous. Like, how did you make your money, like you say? And for all of us that grew up with support from the public sector as well, we should understand, unfortunately, there's sometimes the ones that are most adamant that they don't need the state are the ones that relied on the state. Like, I've had conversations with people on the doorstep that are like, yeah, I grew up in a council estate, but yet don't want to pay taxes and think that, you know, it's all their hard work. And I'm like, yeah, but what if you didn't have that roof over your heads growing up? Like, think about that. We need to support other people in the same situation. I think there is some pushback. And the thing that I find interesting is that when you look at the polling and the focus groups with people that are very seriously considering voting reform or even have voted reform, they do support more action on the richest. So there is Nigel Farage doesn't represent that voter base because they do think it's unfair how the richest can get away with anything but not paying their taxes. And there is that sense of anger. And I think it's really for us to tell that story of patriotism that is about investing in this country and giving back. And other countries do that. And people can be proud. People in other countries can be proud to pay their taxes.
Absolutely. I know, that seems very far removed, I think, for a lot of us. Can I ask you to debunk some myths that we hear around the economy all the time? Because I think, obviously, we don't... some of us are lucky enough to study economics. In the French schooling system, we study economics as a standard for a couple of years, as we do philosophy. And I think both of those are really important subjects that sort of make you ask profound questions about the world and how it works, but not everyone has access to those conversations. And so there's these kind of myths that we hear circulated all the time that have become truths because they're repeated. But I want to ask you to help me understand how true they really are. So famously used by Theresa May in 2017, but we've heard other people say variations of it. There is no magic money tree.
So how comes there's always money for war, right? Well, look, at the end of the day, if you're a country like ours, where we have an incredible tax base, even with all the problems, you can always borrow to invest, and you can always print more money. That's what the Bank of England does. We have, a bank here. It's not going to fall apart if we print some more money. Yes, there may be levels at which it creates higher interest rates because of inflation, but that we're not there at all. So there is a magic money tree, and we see it come into action all the time. Right? So if they decide overnight that they're going to put more money into defense in Ukraine, they're not suddenly getting more tax take. That's not how the monetary system works. So, there is a money tree. There is, you have to manage it carefully, but there is.
The second one was about this idea of reassuring the markets, which I feel like that what I find weird about that is it sounds a bit like the markets are some sort of temperamental deity. Do we have to sort of stroke the markets? Are the markets temperamental? Why do we have to reassure them?
There's a lot on the bond markets, a lot of the conversation around that, because if you spook the bond markets and the interest rates on our debt goes up, unfortunately, that is the way the world works right now. What I would say is that Trump didn't care about that at all. He came in, did what he wanted. He spooked all the markets, and then they calmed down. And what I would say is that you've got to have a clear story and a clear way in which you're backing up investment. So if you're borrowing more to invest, you need to be clear that you have a strong tax base, and the markets will be calmed knowing that this country can pay it back. But in general, I would say we are far too interested in what the markets are saying versus what would actually improve people's lives. And guess what? The beauty of it is, if you improve people's lives and they have more money in the pocket, the economy would also be stronger, right? So we always I really hate the whole conversation around paying back debt, because actually the best way in which you can pay back national debt is have more people in work paying taxes. So focus on what would give people good jobs, and the rest would sort itself out.
What about this one, which we hear from the right all the time? The invisible hand will fix the economy because when left alone, markets self-correct.
When left alone, actually, monopoly power happens and markets just concentrate more and more. And we see that so much in different parts of the economy, even the way in the sort of private sector in social care or whatever. What happens is that because they're wait, I can make more money if I've got more of this market share, and that we have less back office, for instance. So they just try and concentrate it more and more. We can see that in the data.
One of the big proposals, of course, that you've put forward, you're not alone, Zach Polanski from the Green Party, Gary Economics, many people talking about this 2% wealth tax, right? Which is the idea of, I think in your case, 2% on assets above 10 million, right? Mm-hmm. So not income. So you could earn 10 million every single year and not pay additional tax, but you would get taxed on your assets that are above 10 million. Doesn't sound that radical.
Yeah, there's not many people that earn 10 million purely from income, I would say, firstly. If you're at that level, you're bound to be getting some of it from your wealth and dividends and the rest of it. And so you can increase taxes there. In a way, you're right that 2% is really low, because even if we look at the last year and what Oxfam found in billionaire wealth, their wealth went up by 16% last year. So at 2%, it doesn't even touch, the fact that their money is rolling more and more. But there's a couple of reasons I really like this idea. One is because it's a start. We're going to start measuring how much wealth people have got, because we don't even have a good handle on that. In the UK, and the UK is apparently one of the most sophisticated tax systems in the world, we got rid of our high net worth individuals team in HMRC. So we don't even know how rich the rich are. There was a scathing report from the Public Accounts Committee, scathing, that just said, we don't even know how many billionaires and millionaires we have. So just even a 1% tax is good because it starts forcing us to look at how much they have. And the other reason I really like it is because the public like it. And it's easy to explain. You know, it has a very clear unfairness principle or fairness principle built into it. And it gives us an opportunity to talk then about the other ways in which we want to restructure the economy and redistribute wealth, right? Public ownership and the rest of it. So I think for that reason, I think it needs to be a headline for the progressive movement because we've come so far. Like no one was talking about this 5 years ago. And it's really, you know, my predecessor at Tax Justice UK, he did a lot of work on bringing in all these organisations, even Greenpeace, you know, campaigning on it now. So it's something that we could potentially win. You know, this Labour government is reluctant for the ideological reasons, but it is something we could win, that we could see in the next manifesto. So, we have to keep going.
I often like to recall that our national myth in France, you know, the one we celebrate every year, is a story of like the people running up on the rich, decapitating them, banging open the prisons, letting loose all the prisoners and creating a republic. And I just say that, you know, not saying we should follow that necessarily, but I am suggesting that like when you have a fundamental national myth that is about literally decapitating the rich, there is implied in that the notion that we won't be ruled by a rich elite. Like, let them eat bread is not happening again. We will take to the streets, we will burn cars, we will do, not advocating that, obviously. But you know what I mean? There's some
Whereas
sense
here
of
we've
like...
got a real deference.
Yes, for authority, which is wild.
Which comes from the royal family. And it comes to the fact that all of our like things that we celebrate are to do with the royal family and the super rich. I find it so abhorrent. Like, why don't we have like working class holidays, like celebrate working class people in this country?
I mean, as somebody who sort of definitely feels more European than British, I feel like I still observe a very feudal system in this country. So let's talk about that for a second. So the UK likes to think of itself as more civilized than the US, but our social mobility is now closer to America's than it is to Denmark's. The UK is currently experiencing what researchers call a flatlining of opportunity. So only about 44% of young people born since 2010 are expected to earn more than their parents. And that's a sharp drop of 65%. From before the 2008 financial crisis. So is Britain's flattening of opportunity a sort of accidental byproduct of sort of this terrible economic period we're going through? Or is it a deliberate feature of the class system?
Yeah, it's an inevitable feature of the inequality and the levels of inequality we have. Like if you look at places like Denmark, why do they have higher levels of social mobility? They have lower levels of inequality because when the rich sew up the system to make sure their kids have the same privileges as them. So if the rich are getting richer and they're just like sewing up that system more and more, then obviously you're not going to have higher levels of social mobility. And then if you've got an economy that isn't producing the sorts of jobs that would allow people to have more money, then again, right, people are kind of stuck in their place. So one of the fundamental lies that we're told, and that keeps inequality in its place, that like it's fine, inequality is fine as long as anyone can make it to the top. But in the meantime, they haven't said that actually inequality is just pulling the rungs of the ladder apart, and people can't climb that. People don't even have access to the ladder, right? So it's so frustrating when I hear that sentiment come about from people, especially working class people, because I'm like, yeah, you know that they tell you that myth in order to essentially keep you in your place. Because what it does is that you end up focusing on like, what can I do so that all these problems that poor people have are not my problems anymore, rather than what are we going to collectively do to change the system? And by the way, even in itself, even if it was true that anyone could make it to the top, the idea of this extreme hierarchy and meritocracy means that you get to the top and everyone else, doesn't result in the kind of society that most of us would want to live in. Right? Because that is the hierarchy, and everyone lower down is made to feel as less. And, you know, I remember a family member of ours that said, was talking about being an electrician and being sort of embarrassed about meeting some of my friends. And I remember Priti Patel had done a speech around that time that was basically saying, low wage workers, low skilled workers, the way that language. And he was like, I guess she's talking about me. And he looked at the floor and his whole demeanor. And I just thought, that is what they're trying to do. That's what this system is. Because if making it isn't being an electrician, even though that's such a helpful role in society, hello, or being a care worker, you know, some of the most important things, that's not making it. That's not being at the top of this hierarchy. Then actually we just need to question this hierarchy altogether. The whole idea of social mobility needs to be questioned. We need to have a much more community-minded view of the things that are important in our society. So making it is all of those things. Making it is being working class. Like, you know, there's inherent in that story that having a working class accent is somehow embarrassing. You should climb this ladder and get rich and leave your working class community, as if there's something wrong with those communities. There isn't. So, you know, I just anything to do with social mobility, and every prime minister talks about this is my yearning and wish, and what I'm committed to is that any child should make it. Just big eye roll. Just I cannot.
Well, I mean, also, we are being pumped, and all the red pill bros have swallowed this.
Yeah.
They're going to be the exception, Faiza. Yeah. They're going to be the millionaire, and screw the rest of you. And you're just like, oh, sweetheart. And bless your cotton socks.
I mean, part of the reason I wrote my book about this was like anger for years, but it was COVID, and Elon Musk had become the richest man in the world that year. And there was this article on BBC that was like 6 things you can learn from Elon Musk, and one was like, just think big and don't care about the money. It's not about the money. And
just live under an apartheid and you'll be inherited.
100%, right? So nowhere in there did it say be born in an apartheid system that makes you a superior human being. He was literally born in apartheid South Africa. It was just unbelievable to me that we completely strip out the context of the world in which you grow up in, and then say like, oh, they just made it because they're brilliant. That's just not the case.
And also not word on the grapevine. Let me ask you about when we talk about the working class in this country, it feels to me like the only conversation I'm hearing of late is around the white working class and the issues facing the white working class. What exactly is specific and distinct about white working class experience that needs attention separately to the experiences of other members of the working class?
It's an engineered narrative, really. I mean, it's a story to say Black and brown people have taken all the resources. Black and brown people get everything. And it's really the white working class, rather than the working class as a whole, that is being left behind. And it's just classic divide and rule. Classic. We are going to get you to fight amongst yourselves, and so we can do what we want. And we are going to racialize the working class and make it such that this is about race and not about class. So race is obviously important as well. There's added levels of prejudice in there. But imagine a working class, regardless of race, saying, we don't accept this. We're going to stand up for our neighbours. We are going to fight this political elite. That is so dangerous for those at the top, for the likes of Nigel Farage, for people to be like, wait a minute, what are you going to do on taxing the rich more? You don't support taxing the rich more. So actually, you're not standing up for the working class community. So it's absolutely engineered. It's the perfect get out, right? And the thing that we found when we did focus groups across the country, there's an incredible shared experience that working class people have. And when the unions were stronger in this country and it was a different age where you could get good jobs and you didn't have to work all the time, there was a pride in being working class, and it was good to be working class. It wasn't necessarily a negative thing. But what's happened, you know, with deindustrialization and the way in which the working class communities have been stripped of power, is that they all face certain things. They share this lack of power. They share a prejudice because, there's very strong class prejudice. We heard it all over the country. They felt it when they were in touch with the public sector. If they went to ask for support on housing, they felt it in everyday life that they're looked down on, right? That my window is little and their window is big. Like they felt in these real and fundamental ways. And there was a lot of positivity around the strength they felt about their community and their place. So they purposely don't tell this story, that actually we're mostly the same and we want the same things and we feel this inequality and unfairness in the same way, and we're angry at our elites, and we want our children to have a strong future. We want to feel hopeful again. That's how most people feel. So, starting from a point of solidarity and building that sense of shared experience is so important. And it's the opposite to what they're doing.
But what would you say to the people who say, but there is research and evidence that some white working class communities are falling behind if you look at like education, and they'll say, well, that's because we've had sort of forms of affirmative action to support, talented young people from ethnic minority backgrounds that allow them to succeed. But there's been nothing in place for white working class. I guess it's boys in particular who seem to be failing in the educational system. What would you say to the people who say, no one cares about those boys?
The reason why there is that discrepancy is partly about multicultural communities in cities and resources that have been built in cities. This is about regional economics, right? This isn't about race so much as it's about place. And so if you look in London, there was a time when working class kids of all races in London were doing really, really badly. Our schools were really poor in London. And there was this London Challenge, and they head teachers came together and they really upped the standards. And there was money put into getting teachers to stay in London, for instance. And so that raised the standards. Whereas other communities and other parts of the countries that have been massively left behind didn't get those things. So it looks like a race issue, but really it is about resources, but it's not because they're white working class. It's because of where they live and the lack of attention that has been paid to these communities. And it's so frustrating to me because, again, this is somewhere where the working class should be coming together and saying we will not accept our communities being left impoverished and our public services being undermined. And so that is what that story is about.
I want to ask you about something that I'm concerned about when I hear about economics on the left and about solutions, economic solutions on the left. So left-wing economists will regard unions and the power of workers and trade unions as being really a way to push back against the power of corporations and the power of big money. But how does that work in practice when we're hearing that by 2030, an estimated 92 million jobs will be displaced by AI? We're hearing Sam Altman say that AI will soon make the cost of labor fall to zero, effectively, in his words, freeing us from the tax of human work. When you can no longer rely on the power of the worker to be wielded as leverage against the corporations, because they don't need our labor, what's left?
Yeah, firstly, I do think some of that is maybe overblown. And I think through time, even in my lifetime, we've heard various stories about how many jobs will be lost through technology. And certainly we're seeing young people finding it harder to get work for various reasons, and AI being one of the reasons. I would say that the power of the worker is still important, or the power of the people. So it might not be, trade unionism has really changed. Like, you can't expect people to be in the workplace in the same way, but ways in which to collectively come together and wrestle the amount of money that those people at the top of these AI companies are making, and the dividends paid to their shareholders, and wrestle back some of that ownership of those structures, because a lot of those things were built off public investments. We are going to see inequality get worse, and it's going to get really ugly. When car companies were some of the richest companies around, like, they created thousands and thousands of jobs, right? And WhatsApp created 50 jobs. So it's when you are making so much profit and you're not having to have so many workers, then more of that has to be taxed, because the site is just not going to work with that many people out of work or on very low incomes or precarious work. So we do need to have stronger collective power. It might not be just trade unions, of course, but we do need to find other ways in which to build that.
We're always told, and I personally like to believe in the notion that people have the power, but today elites, the governments possess tools that previous generations couldn't have imagined, right? And I'm talking about tools of control that have been developed from AI, automation, surveillance, algorithmic control. Here in the UK, of course, there's this plan to introduce digital ID, which many view as a form of surveillance. What connection do you see between inequality and state surveillance that perhaps we should be alert to? In situations when you have this growing gap, and where people are waking up and getting angry, and I do think we're there, part of the reform vote, or the far right anywhere, part of the shift to that is anger, then
it results in people at the top feeling insecure. And what are they going to do? They're going to up surveillance because they need to be in control. So when you have these levels of inequality, and we see it across the world again, like clamping down on civil liberties, on protests. We see it here by a so-called human rights prime minister, human rights lawyer who's a prime minister. They are going to use that as a tool in which to control us because people have had enough. And if they fear some of that and how that can come out, then yeah, they'll watch us closely.
Anything we can be doing to increase our power as the economic agents driving the economy and, protects ourselves from the sort of measures that states are bringing in to survey us rather than support us?
I mean, we need a fundamental overhaul in our economics and our politics. And it's, I guess, over the years when we've seen like possibilities of like Bernie or Corbyn here, or the possibility of having something different, what I've realized is there's really no shortcuts to this. There's no like one person that's going to come in. Like, I'm really excited about Zach Polanski too, but, he would say himself that, it's not just about him. It's about the way in which we build grassroots power. And the thing I would say to everyone is build your community, look in your community, see how you're going to get involved, because you don't know what's going to happen. And if you have those connections in your community and something comes along, it's then easy to mobilize. And I'm talking to people in New York about Zohran Mamdani, and actually it's often the story that these community groups were there, grassroots community groups were there for 10 years, decades. And when Zohran came along, they were able to mobilize. So look at what you can do in your community, have those conversations, talk about politics, talk about the way in which the world needs to change, and be ready, because this is falling apart and there will be various opportunities for us to mobilize.
Faiza Shaheen, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to
Thank you.
us. Thank you so much for watching today's episode. If any of what we have just talked about resonated with you or got you thinking, we would love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to follow the tea here on YouTube, follow us on Instagram and TikTok, and join us on Patreon. You'll get ad-free episodes, bonus content, and have a say in what we cover next. Until next time, stay awake and we'll be back soon with more tea. Thanks for tuning into The Tea. If this conversation resonated with you, let us know in the comments below. We love to hear from you. And remember to share our content with someone you think should hear it. And why not listen to these other episodes we think you'll love? Let's keep the conversation flowing.